A Pair of Schoolgirls by Angela Brazil. Chapter 14. Water Plantain. Dorothy returned to Avondale resolved to work doubly hard. There was certainly plenty to be done if she did not wish to fall behind in her form. She had missed many of the lessons, and to recover the ground that she had lost meant studying the textbooks by herself, and trying to assimilate endless pages of arrears. Yet I must, she thought. If I leave out the least scrap, that's sure to be the very piece I shall get in the exam. I'm going over every single line, though it's cruel translating Virgil and learning Racine in such big doses. Never mind, Dorothy Greenfield, you've got to do it. I shan't let you off, however much you hate it. Faithful to her determination, Dorothy set the alarm in her bedroom for 5:45, and had nearly an hour and a half study each morning before Martha called her at 7:15. It was very tempting sometimes to turn over and go to sleep again, but she soon began to grow quite used to her early rising, and it seemed almost a shame to stay in bed when the sun was up, and the thrush was singing cheerily in the elder bush outside. A nursing experience. The aim that Dorothy had in view was so ambitious that she hardly dared confess it even to herself. Every year a prize was given at Avondale called the William Scott Memorial. It was thus named after the founder of the college, who had left a sum of money in his will for the purpose. It was awarded annually to the girl in any form who obtained the highest percentage of marks in the examinations. Though it was generally gained by members of the Sixth, it did not of necessity fall to them. Every girl had an equal opportunity, for it went entirely by their relative scores, the object being to distinguish the pupil who had worked the best, irrespective of age. I believe it fell once to the second, but the Sixth have had it for 4 years now, thought Dorothy. Time for a new departure. I don't suppose I've the slightest ghost of a chance, but it's worth trying. I shan't mention my hopes to anybody, though, not even to Aunt Barbara. They are so remote. Her increased efforts could not fail to win notice, however, at the college. Dorothy Greenfield, you're just swatting, said Mavi Morris one day. I don't believe you'd a fault in your last German exercise, and you recited all that Virgil without one single slip. What's come over you? Nothing, replied Dorothy, turning a little red. You talk as if I'd been committing a crime. So you have. You're raising the general average of the standard, and that's not fair to the rest of the form. When Pitty sees you with 3 excellents to your name, she thinks I ought to do the same. Why can't you? Why? You ask me why? Do you think I'm going to muddle my brains more than I can help, just in the middle of the tennis season? You little know Mavi Morris. No, Dorothy, I've a distinct grievance against you. There you are now, actually surreptitiously squinting at a book while I'm talking to you. It's not a lesson book, at any rate, "It's from the library," retorted Dorothy. "Let me look at it." "You humbug, it's a manual of botany." "I call that lessons, in all conscience." "Well, it has jolly colored illustrations," said Dorothy, trying to plead extenuating circumstances. "I want to hunt out the names of some specimens I've found. We have heaps of wildflowers growing in the lanes at Hereford. Whitewashed, but not exonerated. Your manual smacks too much of school for my taste. Why don't you take a leaf from E and practice tennis? No luck for such a bad server as I am." "Well, I didn't say you'd win the championship. I've no chance myself against Val and Margaret. Here's Alison, she'll reason with you. She isn't on the rising balance of the form any more than I am myself. Alison, tell Dorothy to quit this everlasting studying. Don't you agree with me that it makes it far harder for us slackers?" Alison laughed good-naturedly. She never troubled much about her own lessons, for her mother was generally so anxious regarding her health, and so afraid of her overworking herself, that an hour's preparation sufficed for her homework, and, indeed, if she took more, Mrs. Clark would threaten to complain to Miss Tempest. "Yes, Dorothy's turning into quite an old bookworm," she replied. "She even insisted on looking over her Latin in the train this morning. I can't stand that, because I always like to talk. I don't get too much of Dorothy's company." It was still a grievance to Alison that her mother would not sanction any closer intimacy with her friend. She had hoped, after the visit to Ringborough, that matters would be on a different footing, and that she would be allowed to introduce Dorothy at home and invite her frequently. She could not understand why, for no apparently adequate reason, she must be debarred from her society. The fact that she was discouraged from being on too familiar terms had the effect of making her even more enthusiastic in her affection. There was a strong vein of obstinacy in her disposition, and if she once took up an idea she was apt to keep to it. "Uncle David likes Dorothy," she argued. "He told Mother not to be ridiculous. I heard him say so. Perhaps in time I shall get my own way." Mrs. Clark, anxious not to thwart her darling more than was necessary, had many times proposed that some other classmate from Avondale should be asked to Lindenley. But Alison had flatly refused. "I can't possibly have Grace Russell or Ruth Harmon without inviting Dorothy. She'd think it most peculiar and unkind. No, Mother dearest, if I mayn't have her I'd rather not ask anybody at all." "But you ought to have young companions," Bertie protested Mrs. Clark fretfully. "Your uncle was speaking to me on that very subject before he went to Scotland, and he is your guardian, so he is partly responsible for you. I believe I shall have to send you to a boarding school after all." "No, no, I should be miserable, and so would you without me. I'd hate to leave the coal." "Don't worry, Motherkins, Uncle David shan't lecture you." "Naughty fellow! I won't be friends with him if he hints at boarding school again. I shall certainly talk it over with him when he returns from Lochaber, said Mrs. Clark. When is he coming back? Is he really going to take a house near here, Mother? I don't know. He may possibly settle in the south, in which case I should certainly decide to remove, and to go and live near him. Oh, please no. I don't want to leave Letchworth or the Coal Comma, protested Alison. Alison was indeed absolutely happy at Avondale. For a day school the arrangements were perfect, and there were many features of the course there which suited her tastes. She liked the ambulance guild and the tennis club, and both the gymnasium and the laboratory were large and specially well equipped, far more so than in most boarding schools. This term, also, Miss Carter, the science mistress, had begun a very interesting series of nature study lessons, which included birds and insects, and made a special point of botany, and Alison, who adored flowers, threw herself into it heart and soul. It was the one subject over which she really gave herself much trouble. She collected specimens and pressed them, identified them from big volumes of Sowerby in the library at Lindonley, mounted them on sheets of cardboard, and printed their names neatly underneath. I shall have something to send to the Arts and Crafts exhibition, she said, though I'm no good at anything else. No good? Fiddlesticks, exclaimed Dorothy. True, my dear. Have you ever seen me top at an exam, or even second? Why, I only get excellent once in a blue moon, and then I'm so astonished, I think it must be a mistake. I'm not picked out to play at school concerts, or recite, or act, or show off in any way. Oh, don't think I'm complaining. I don't crave for notoriety. There's nothing I detest worse than having to perform in public. But pressed flowers are different. I can do them in private at home, and let them be seen without exhibiting myself. I wish I could find a few more specimens. I believe I've picked everything that's to be had at Letchworth. Miss Carter promised she'd take us a botanizing ramble some afternoon, said Dorothy. So she did. We must keep her to her word. Let us try to catch her now in the corridor, and see if we can get her to name a definite day. Ask Mavi and Grace to come too. They're the keenest next to us. The little group of enthusiasts waylaid the mistress as she came out of the library, and, reminding her of the projected expedition, nailed her to the point. Very well, we will decide on next Saturday afternoon, provided, of course, that it's a fine day, replied Miss Carter. And the place? Asked Alison. I think we can't do better than Beachfield. We could walk along the embankment to Longacre, and take the train back from there. We ought to find plenty of flowers on the way. And we might stop and have tea somewhere, suggested Alison, who was determined to make an outing of it. Yes, so we might. There's an inn by the river about halfway to Longacre, and several cottages that cater for visitors. We can start quite early, I suppose. I'll look up the railway guide, and pin a program on the notice board tomorrow. There, you see, said Allison, as the deputation returned in triumph, there's nothing like sticking to a thing. I believe in people keeping promises when they make them. We shall have a ripping afternoon. Miss Carter is ever so jolly. And I expect she'll be jollier still when she's off duty. Notwithstanding the tempting nature of the program, only 10 put down their names for the botanizing expedition. In summer there were many diversions for Saturday's holiday, the tennis season was in full swing, and the girls had attractions at their own homes that outweighed a country ramble. It's far nicer without too many, declared Allison. I've been school excursions before, at Lemstead, and it's generally so hard to get everybody to come along. Half the party is always lagging behind, and then a dozen come running up and want all the explanations over again, just when the mistress has finished describing something. You waste an immense amount of time in collecting people. I mean to stick to Miss Carter like glue the whole afternoon. Absorbing information like a piece of blotting paper, laughed Mavi. Quite a new character for you, Allison Clark. Don't mock. You're as keen on going as I am myself. The 10 nature students met Miss Carter at Coalminster Station at 2:30 on the Saturday, and started off for Beachfield, which was on a different line from Hereford and Letchworth. Neither Dorothy nor Allison knew the place, so to them at least it had the charm of novelty. I've often walked over the fields to Longacre, said Grace Russell, but I don't mind going again. It will seem fresh if we're looking for flowers. I like an object when I'm out. And I like the fun of being out, object or no object, said Mavi. I honestly confess I'm looking forward to tea time. You shameless materialist, said Miss Carter. You shan't have a single cup unless you can name a dozen flowers. I shall put you through an examination first. I'll be attentive, with tea as my goal. There was no doubt about it, Miss Carter was jolly. She talked and joked as merrily as the girls themselves, climbed stiles with agility, and, much to her pupils' amusement, exhibited an abject terror of cows. It was born in me, and I can't conquer it, she declared. I suppose it's partly because I'm own-bred. The very sight of their horns puts me in a panic. I'll walk along first and shoo them away with my umbrella, said Dorothy, laughing. What heroism! I really envy your courage. To me the pleasures of botany are sadly spoilt by cows. There is invariably one in the meadow here. I want to pick my best specimens. In spite of her real or pretended fears, Miss Carter ventured to take the path which led over the fields to Longacre. It was a pretty walk, partly through a park shaded with beautiful trees, and partly along an embankment which formed the remains of an ancient fortification against the Danes. The hay was still uncut, so the fields were full of flowers, and without unduly trespassing into the long grass the girls were able to pick many specimens. Allison kept to her intention of sticking to Miss Carter, and scarcely left her side. She enjoyed the explanations, and passed them on to Mavi, who was collecting her dozen plants with ostentatious zeal. Dorothy was told off as policeman to bring up stragglers. "We shall never get there at all if you can't keep together and come along," said Miss Carter. "I can see a little peep of the river, and one chimney of the inn over there in the distance. Don't you feel inclined for tea?" "Rather," agreed the girls, making a spurt. The inn was one of those small, wayside places common in rural districts. It catered for anglers and tourists, and had a pretty, flowery garden, set with wooden benches and tables ready for picnic parties. It was a suitable spot for a halt. Everyone felt warm with the walk, and disposed to welcome the sight of cups and saucers. "How sweet it is here," said Allison to Dorothy. "Something smells perfectly delicious, I don't know hat. I think it must be honeysuckle down by the river." "Then let us go and see." "It's rather early for honeysuckle, I haven't found any out yet. It might perhaps be a sweetbriar. Tea isn't quite ready, so we shall have plenty of time." The two girls strolled out of the garden and down a short lane that led to the river. It was beautiful there. The grassy banks were white with tall, lacy, umbelliferous plants, and groups of willows drooped their picturesque, shimmering boughs over the water. "Look at the old weir," said Allison. "I believe there used to be a mill here once, only it isn't working now." "Dorothy, what's that growing in the river? Isn't it water plantain? It looks uncommonly like it. I must have a piece, I positively must." "How can we get some? Do you think we could walk along the edge of the weir and reach it? It's only a few yards off." "I dare say we might, if we could hold on to those willows." "Let us try. Give me your hand." "It's rather slippery," said Dorothy, as she essayed to follow. Catching on to the branches of a willow, the two girls stepped cautiously along the uncovered stones at the edge of the weir towards the spot where the water plantain was growing so temptingly. "There's a splendid piece almost within reach," said Allison. "Stick tight to my hand, Dorothy, and I'll bend over. I'm within an inch of it." "Be careful," exclaimed Dorothy. "Don't pull." But her warning came too late. Allison, in her effort to grasp the plantain, put her weight on her friend, and to support the strain Dorothy leaned backwards. Allison, snatching a piece of the flower, suddenly released the tension. The pair swayed for an instant, overbalanced, and then slipped, shrieking, down the sloping side of the weir.